Today we're taking a look at the PowKiddy X28, which is an Android-based handheld emulation console. I was quite curious to see what this could do because I'd never used an Android handheld before, and I'd just finished taking a look at this one, which is the PowKiddy X25, which was Linux-based. So to do a comparison between the two and to find out what this system can do, let's get started. So let's begin by taking a look at the system itself. I have to say I love the design of this. It looks really professional, it looks really clean and a lot better than some of the other PowKiddy consoles that I've experienced. The analog sticks were really nice too, they're basically the same as the Switch Lite ones. The D-pad did leave a lot to be desired though, because unfortunately it does have a lot of false diagonals and things like that. And there's also a few Android specific buttons on here as well, so there's the button there to allow you to open up the app switcher. There's a G button next to it which allows you to open up the touchscreen interface where you can move the controls around for games that use the touchscreen if you wanted to remap it to the buttons, which is really cool and it's actually really intuitive. Although sometimes it doesn't quite register where you've actually put them and you have to try and do it a few times. But apart from that, in terms of the look and feel of it, I'm definitely very happy, and it is a big step up from the X55, which was the previous PowKiddy device that I used. As you can see, it's basically exactly the same size as it, although it's slightly different shape. You would think that maybe having the cut-off edges would make it a little bit less comfortable, but honestly, I think they're both just as comfortable to use. A big improvement over this new one though is the fact that the buttons aren't quite as loud or clicky as they were before, which is a very nice improvement. And overall, I just love the design, the form factor. There is one thing that the PowKiddy X55 had that the new one doesn't, and that is dual micro SD card slots, which I guess is kind of a loss for some people, although I never really had a reason to use both of them at the same time anyway. So I definitely give it high praise for the look and feel of the device. Unfortunately, everything else isn't quite as positive. So right out of the box, I had a completely awful experience with this, and I don't want to beat around the bush. I was sent this for review by Mech DIY, and I should be trying to promote it because they gave me a code to use in the description so that I get a bit of kickback if people buy this, but I want to be completely honest here and say that the experience out of the box compared to this one was an absolute nightmare. It was all in Chinese, it was just stuffed with random Chinese Android apps. There was no Play Store, which the website actually said there would be, so there was no way of me actually downloading anything to try and get around any of this. And I spent a good few hours just struggling to even figure out what to do with this system. And eventually I took the micro SD card out of here, put it in the computer, and actually downloaded an alternate store for Android to be able to run kind of the Play Store on this without actually installing the official Play Store. So it was actually there called the Aurora Store. So I'll put a link in the description if you do get one of these so that you can actually get your hands on something that runs in English and actually try and set some of these emulators up. And that is where the next big hurdle came in. So I thought it was going to be like this with the emulators already installed right out of the box and you can just choose them from a menu. But no, this was just a completely blank system, and because this uses Android, you have to rely on Android apps to do the emulation for you. And there's so many out there, there's some paid, there's some free. I tried using RetroBreak, which apparently works across a variety of different systems, but I installed it on here, and because it's the wrong version of Android, you can't actually use anything from the SD card. So RetroBreak was completely out of the question. So I ended up scouring the fake Play Store and just downloading any kind of emulators that I could find, and I had very mixed results. Some of them played okay, some of them were absolutely awful, some of them were just stuffed full of adverts. Some of them you can't get the virtual buttons off the screen, even though this actually has physical buttons. The whole thing has just been a complete nightmare to get up and running, and I was not having any fun with it whatsoever. The other thing that I was more excited to try was actually some of the Android games, and I have to say the experience playing Android games on this has been just as bad, honestly. Out of the 8 or 9 games that I've tried, 4 or 5 of them just didn't work at all. It just said it was incompatible. A few of them don't use the buttons at all, even though I thought they would. And there is a button remapping system, there is some button remapping software, but again, it doesn't really seem to work very well. You can move the things around on the touchscreen, so in theory, you're actually able to use the analog stick to move the character around, but it seems quite buggy. Sometimes I move the stick and it just flicks in a different direction, or sometimes the camera starts moving instead. And the specs inside this system leave a lot to be desired as well. I was actually very excited to play Honkai Star Rail on this, and the experience has just been absolutely awful. There was no out-of-the-box button controls, so I tried remapping them using the touchscreen interface, and it just didn't work very well at all. I had to play everything on low settings, and even then it couldn't hit a stable 30 frames a second. It took about 2 minutes to load from the title screen to get into the game, and it just has not been a good experience. And even more frustratingly, I tried to load the game up to play it again for this video, and because there was an update, it actually logged me out. And I've been using Facebook on this game on my iPhone, and it's worked perfectly fine, but as you can see, when I clicked login with Facebook here, it took me to this screen on the login page, and I could not scroll down to actually log into the game at all, so the game is pretty much unplayable at this point. I thought it might be cool to try out some streaming services on here as well, so I tried logging into Xbox Game Pass, and unfortunately it said it's not supported on this device either, and I also tried GeForce Now and I couldn't get that to work either. There was one game on this operating system which was built in, which actually works surprisingly well. It was called Riptide GT2, and as you can see here, it runs at a really smooth frame rate and the controls actually work perfectly. So maybe I'm just not looking for the right games on the Google Store, because I was genuinely impressed with the gameplay and the responsiveness of this one. So maybe I am being a little bit harsh on the system, and it all depends on whether you find the right games to play on it, because this was actually a highlight of the entire experience for me. On some more basic Android games like Horizon Chase, that actually worked pretty well, so it's not entirely a complete write-off. It does have some merit to it, and I think if you could get something like RetroArch to work, then it might actually be a good alternative to a more emulation-focused handheld like this one. But as it stands, for the price, you're basically paying an extra 50 or 60 quid. Compared to this one here, I really don't think it's worth it. The bump in specs doesn't really make that much difference. I was hoping to be able to play things like GameCube and PlayStation 2, but I haven't found any games that work on this properly. I tried playing Wind Waker, I tried playing Twilight Princess, I tried playing F-Zero on the GameCube, and none of those ran at full speed. If you're actually attempting to play anything more than PS1, which is basically what this one went up to here, then you're pretty much going to get the same experience with PS1, N64 and stuff, if you find the right emulators, that is. But if you try and go for anything higher, like GameCube or PlayStation 2, you're just going to be disappointed. PlayStation 2 was even worse. I tried playing a game called Shocks, which is one of my favourite racing games from PS2, and the performance on this was just dreadful. I had to turn all the settings down, and even then I couldn't get it running smoothly. Sometimes the graphics would just glitch out randomly, and it just was not a fun experience. It does come with its own launcher as well, so you're not just having to use Android if you don't want to, although the launcher it comes with out of the box just doesn't make any sense at all. It was just filled with random Chinese apps that I couldn't use, and the different sections of this interface just didn't really make any sense either. So the ideal thing to do is just ignore this, go into the settings and boot up Android by default. And I'm not really an Android guy, so if you use Android more than I do, then maybe you can find easier workarounds and you know how to tweak the settings to get the most out of the system, but honestly, this couldn't really do anything I was hoping for it to be able to, so I am very, very disappointed. And I hope that in the future I can find a retro handheld emulator that lives up to my expectations and can actually run the games better. But basically the only games that you're actually able to play on this at full speed are basically the same games that you can play on something like the Miu Mini Plus, or like this one here, the RG35XX, that I did a video on previously, and Mech DIY actually stocks all of them as well. So even though I would get more money off them by recommending this one, I would actually say go for something like this or the Miu Mini Plus instead. There'll be links down below to all of them. Let me know if you thought I was being a bit too harsh on this, because it does have some cool features and I was kind of looking forward to using an Android device, but the specs just really aren't good enough to be able to recommend this to anyone. So that's where I'm going to leave this video, just a short one this week, and this will probably be the last handheld video for a while, because it's not really the kind of video that I want to make going forward. I want to dedicate this channel more towards gaming history and some of my own personal memories and experiences. So I hope you're looking forward to stuff like that. And if you do want to see more emulators and handheld consoles, then I have done a few videos on them in the past, so click up here and maybe go and experience one of those videos next. That's all for now. I'll see you all again very soon. Goodbye.